to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hi Lorraine, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Stu. And you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. So welcome everybody to the next edition of Conveyancing Matters. Today we thought we'd have a chat about some general questions regarding property lawyers. So I know you've got a list of things you want to discuss, Lorraine.
Yeah, I do, because there are lots of sort of misconceptions out there about the sort of the status and who clients are dealing with when they instruct their conveyancer. And I thought it would be quite useful to sort of demystify that for people. And one of the first questions that people often ask is, what's the difference between a conveyancer and a solicitor? So that seems to be a good place to start. So, I mean, just to explain to people really, conveyancer is generally the sort of umbrella term that is given to people who, generally speaking, are qualified and are either solicitors or licensed conveyancers. And this is where, rather happily, Stu, on the Conveyancing Matters side of the fence, we've got one each here. So I'm a solicitor. And that means broadly that I got the professional qualification as a solicitor many years ago, many years ago. And I specialised in property work, frankly, as a lot of people do, because that's what you end up doing when you're training. You end up doing the job that, is available for you. But I think the key point about solicitors, that a solicitor is a professional qualification, but it does mean that I could work in other areas of the law apart from conveyancing without having to get an additional qualification. Now, clearly, it's up to me to make sure I'm competent to do whatever area of practice I chose to be in. But if I got fed up of conveyancing, and hey, why would I could, for example, do wills and probate work, which in practice I have done, or if I wanted to go into, family crime, personal injury, whatever, I could do that, subject to, making sure I've got the right experience behind me. But the key point is, for anybody out there, I wouldn't need an additional qualification. You, on the other hand, Stu, are a lovely licensed conveyancer. So tell everybody what that means.
Yeah, so basically I'm a qualified licensed conveyancer, which simply means I specialise in property law. So within my qualification, anything to do with the moving process, land law, my qualification's restricted to that arena. So I think the way I always think about the qualification is that, years and years ago, the stereotypical solicitor might do, might act for a handful of clients, and they would sort out their divorce, sort out buying their property. If they'd just got arrested, they'd sort out the criminal matter, whatever the case may be. But I think over the years, law in general has become so complex that to be multidisciplinary across different, different types of law is very, very difficult. And for example, with conveyancing, it's very reactive, and trying to, carry out different areas of law at the same time is very difficult. So I also have a wills and probate license. So at Pieces Legal, we do probate work as well. But there is no way in general that I could run a big probate caseload and conveyancing, because the probate requires hours and hours of sitting down, not taking calls, meetings, etc., talking to executors and beneficiaries, whereby the conveyancing, if you're running a medium to large caseload, is very, very reactive. You're always needing to talk to clients, talk to banks, talking to other lawyers, talking to agents, talking to brokers. So, you wouldn't be able to, in my opinion anyway, combine the two. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people out there that do it, but not on a volume kind of basis. So I always think the law's just become so complex that it needs that segregation. For me personally, when I was looking at the law and when I made the decision to become a licensed conveyancer, it was mainly on the basis that, when people are buying a house, they're looking forward. Whereas with matrimonial, litigation, there's always a grievance and you're looking behind and you're already peed off kind of thing. Whereas, with the house buying, for example, you're looking forward to something happening.
Yeah, that's a really, really good. It's a really good analogy. It's a really good way of describing it, Stu. So a conveyancer is just an umbrella term for a qualified lawyer who does property work, whether that's a solicitor or licensed conveyancer. And then under that, there are, lots of people that support Stu and I in our jobs, whether they are, paralegals, secretaries, support staff, case handlers, legal executives, of course, really, really crucial part of the sort of pantheon of qualified people now. So that, conveyancer is really the umbrella term. And I think it's quite important that people understand the difference. So, maybe one for you then, Stu, because a question that I have seen sort of swilling about then, and we've perhaps answered it to some extent, it's a bit of a myth. Are conveyancers cheaper than solicitors? So what's your view on that?
Not in my opinion. I think that it's much of a muchness. I think potentially many moon ago, the answer would have been yes. But I think perhaps where firms of licensed conveyancers were more specialised, shall I say, in property law, maybe they stole a march early doors. But I think firms of solicitors now have big conveyancing departments that run in a similar way that a firm of licensed conveyancers would. So in my opinion, I don't think there's any difference on quality. I don't think there's any much difference on price. I think it's on a firm by firm basis.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, because I do training around the country, and I have to say sometimes I'm shocked at how much firms are charging, or how little firms are charging for conveyancing and what is essentially a technical job. But of course, what is probably also worth pointing out for people who don't know is that the likes of Stu and I, solicitors and licensed conveyancers, we have to be regulated to provide legal services to the public, because we are gathering confidential information about people and their affairs. So I, as a solicitor, am regulated by an organisation called the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Stu, as a licensed conveyancer, is regulated by the Council for Licensed Conveyancers. The thread that binds the two of us really is that we both have to comply with professional codes of conduct. Crucially, and Stu and I mention this a lot, of course, don't we? We are properly insured. So the idea is that, if we ever do a job and the client suffers losses at our hands, then that loss will be recompensed by the indemnity insurers. And I think that's a really, really big thing for members of the public to check out, that they are actually being represented by a regulated entity that has appropriate indemnity insurance in place. We kind of all assume from the inside looking out that that's what people will do. But of course, on the old costs and fees front, what a lot of firms still aren't complying with, Stu, which is quite interesting, is that both the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the licensed conveyancers subscribe to these things called the transparency rules, 12, 18 months ago or whatever. And essentially, they require us to put details of our conveyancing fees and indeed other work, specified work on our websites. And there are lots and lots of firms that still aren't doing that, Stu, which I find really interesting. There's a really high degree of non-compliance. So how, as a matter of interest, did you sort of face up to dealing with the transparency rules? Did you kind of embrace it as a good way of getting your fees out there and getting working, or a bit of a bore?
We were already doing it. We have a click button on our website that you can go on and self-generate your own estimate of costs. We just thought from a marketing point, we were better off putting our costs out there. We wouldn't be the cheapest, we wouldn't be the most expensive either, but we have no particular reason to hide what costs we will give to our client. So you can go on our website. There's a list in our fees section of the fees that we charge per matter type, and you can even go in there and actually self-create your own estimate of costs bespoke on the property you're buying, and you can instruct us via that medium as well. So we were already doing that before the fee transparency rules were implemented. But like you said, there's a lot of firms that don't. Why? I don't know. I think some people are still fearful of, competitors being able to see what you charge, that kind of thing, perhaps. But then I see that no different as being able to ring somebody up and ask them for a quote over the phone anyway. So,
to be honest, we've done the mystery shopper thing for absolutely years. I mean, I suppose I'm sort of, a bit sort of distinctive, I suppose. So it was never me. But I always got one of my quite sort of ballsy, lovely members of support staff that, could pretend they were sort of, Sheila from Southampton to ring round, and I'd listen to them coming up with all sorts of old cobblers, you know, about what they were buying and where they were buying and all the rest of it. And you know, we've done that for years. So you know, I have to say that when you've been doing this job as long as I have, Stu, nothing's new. But yeah, as I say, there's apparently, according to the SRA at least, quite a high degree of non-compliance. Whether or not there's just a sort of technology challenge for some firms, I entirely think you're right about firms not wanting to know what, you know, their competitors see, you know, seeing them charging. But also, I think, to be fair, what a lot of firms feel is a difficulty is the issue of you know, a conveyancing matter is quite often not completely straightforward, and the need to be able to revise your fees upwards if you anticipate that the matter is going to become more complicated, perhaps because of a deed of easement is needed or something of that nature. And the fact that if you are seen to put a you know, a quote on your site, it can then be difficult to you know, to capture those increased fees should it become necessary. I suspect that part of that was to do.
It's funny you should mention that. We have an additional fees sheet that we send out to our clients as well. And you know, I'll be completely honest, we actually get a bit of kickback from that. And it would be easier not to send it, certainly. And the reason we get a bit of kickback from it is a lot of clients will come back to us and say, well, I wasn't aware of these additional fees. And I say, well, they're not additional fees as such. We're making it clear that these are the additional costs we would charge should this scenario arise, which, you know, which hopefully it won't. We've given you an estimate of cost based on the circumstances you've given to me. For example, once you've completed your purchase, if you want me to carry out a will, there is an additional cost. If you want me to, you know, draft a declaration of trust to protect monies that might be being put in different shares, for example, then there is an additional cost. You know, if you ask that question up front, we will tell you what the cost is. But we put that in there so that everybody's aware right from the start. You know, if you're selling a property, you put up an extension, it needed planning, you haven't got planning, and we maybe need to indemnify or something like that, then, you know, we do make a charge for that. But we're quite clear on the charges that we make and for what. And most of the time they don't apply. You know, a massively high percentage, probably 95% plus. Certainly there are no additional costs whatsoever. I do think it's important that you tell somebody up front, because, you know, there's nothing worse when you take your car to the garage and you say, oh, you know, I want you know, this looked at, and all of a sudden they come back to you and they've looked at that, but they've changed the oil, put 4 new tyres on, and said, oh, the bill's double what I said it would be. You think, oh Christ.
Yeah,
you know,
you've got though, because you've got no choice but to pay to get your car off the forecourt, and that's the difference between you and that's the difference between what everybody else does and what we do. You know, because if somebody made a complaint about me, you know, I am sitting on the high street, I am the target, I will try and put things right, but you know, but and we are very heavily regulated. So to perhaps conclude this conveyancing matter, Stu, you've already hit on them. Because one of the questions that is often posed then is what makes a good conveyancer? And I again say that's whether solicitor or licensed conveyancer. So I would say obviously upfront communication, willingness to communicate and clarity on costs. So maybe just maybe 1 or 2 things. What do you think makes a good conveyancer then, Stu?
I might be a bit controversial on this one, but you know,
really,
in terms of a good conveyancer, it is about communication, and it is about experience in dealing with property and property type. So property type's really, really important, because it's you know, massively different buying a property at auction than it is buying under the normal process. It's massively different if you're buying a new build shared equity property than something that's been existing for 50 years. So I think that one of the really important points is to communicate to the lawyer what property, for example, you're buying or selling, and to check that they've got experience in that arena. Because if you're buying a new property or a property at auction, there are certain timeframes that you're expected to conclude things within, which might be completely different to existing stuff, you know. there will be properties that you could be buying that could be listed, that could have septic tanks. There's all sorts of different things that come up. So I think having a conveyancer that's experienced in all different types of property law, whether it be a solicitor, licensed conveyancer, whatever, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that I think makes a good conveyancer, I think that on the one hand, in an ideal world, an ability to respond promptly is a really good thing. But actually, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in the world that we live in. So I would say an ability to communicate effectively to your client is probably a more important quality, because there will be times when we do, taking the conveyancer stand here, Stu, there will be times, I think, when we have to say to our client, look, I'm sorry, I couldn't get back to you as quickly as I wanted to. So we're not always, it's la la land to think we're always going to be able to communicate promptly. So I actually think one of the most important qualities for a conveyancer, be it solicitor, licensed conveyancer, member of support staff, is actually an ability and a willingness to communicate effectively with your clients. Because sometimes we are just going to have to say, do you know what, I should have done that and I didn't.
Yeah, communication is the biggest buzzword probably, in conveyancing at the moment. And
I think it always has been, to be honest.
Probably has been. You're probably right. And if you look at service levels, it's really important that we try to adhere to those. But I think if I tie in the communication and when you're looking for a lawyer, I think there's an element of being realistic as well.
Yeah.
If you ask a question and you find there's a lawyer that can get back to you in 20 minutes every time you call them or email them, realistically, that's not going to happen. We try and get back to people within 24 hours. We say we will definitely do within 48. And in my mind, that's a realistic figure. Okay. It's so dependent on what stage at the transaction you're at. For example, a client will need, virtually an immediate call, email, if they're in a position of exchanging contracts and completing, because that is a live situation whereby they're in the process of moving. But there are times when you need to look through important documents and you might need a day to do that. So it's been realistic when you're looking at a lawyer in terms of what they are promising, because it is easy to promise the world. It is easy to quote really, really, really low. And it's easy to tell everybody that you can get back to them that morning within the hour, whatever the case may be. But realistically, that's not going to happen. There has to be some kind of boundary. So I think when you're looking to instruct a lawyer of whatever ilk, it's really important that you're realistic with, and look at the promises they make and be realistic in terms of what they can achieve. Because, as I said, there are firms out there that quote extremely low prices. But we've already touched upon, one of the reasons to instruct a lawyer, for example, indemnity insurance. There are other reasons as well. We have to pay into something called a compensation fund. So if as a law firm we were to go bust, belly up, okay, we've paid into a compensation fund for many, many years of our governing body, which means clients do not lose out if they've lodged a deposit with us. And I decide that, I've had enough of conveyancing. I've had enough of speaking to Elaine. I fancy a nice long holiday, never to return again. Okay, which is very possible. Okay, but if that scenario was to ever happen, the client will never ever be at a loss. When they instruct a law firm, they will never be at a loss. And also undertakings. As a law firm, we can give qualified undertakings, which are legally binding promises. Whereas if you were to do it yourself, for example, which is possible, if you were to do it yourself, you can't give those undertakings. So I think when you're looking at law firms, it's important to get somebody that's got the experience in the field that you're looking at. And it's very important also to be realistic on price. If you pay the cheapest possible price, it's possibly a dangerous scenario. And also people promise you the earth.
There is the sort of peanut scenario there, Stu, isn't there, really? So really maybe what we're suggesting to people when they are looking for a property lawyer is try and ring up and speak to the person you're going to be dealing with, get a realistic estimate from them, and ask them, when do you expect to be able to get back to me? How often do you think I'll hear from you? And if you're frankly, if you're a client who has got very high demands in that regard, then you know, either introduce a little bit of realism into your own expectations, or maybe speak to a lawyer who's maybe going to charge you more for that for that
Definitely.
time.
Yeah.
That level of service. Well, thanks for that, Stu. I think they were you know, really interesting set of questions. I think we'll do more conveyancing Q&As on Conveyancing Matters, but for the time being, I'll say bye-bye and wish you an exciting day. Take care, Stu.
All right. Have a good day. Take care.
Bye.